In this video, we're going to go through a Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation from the white side, looking at a sample game from Felipe, a ChessGoals member, and how to crush the Queen's Gambit declined. Stay tuned. This is a game that you definitely won't want to sleep on. Alright, so we start with d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3. So this is the ChessGoals repertoire move order. We do allow black to play sort of like a Rogozin setup. We play this kind of classical d4, c4, knight c3, almost no matter what black does. So now after knight f6, we exchange on d5, and we get what's called the Carlsbad structure. 4 pawns on the queen side for black, 3 for white. And we have kind of some strategic concepts that we play for in the Carlsbad. Usually we try to get the c1 bishop out to g5, play e3, bishop d3, knight e2, castle. Kind of go for that similar plan in all the games. So we see bishop g5, bishop e7, e3, c6, bishop d3, knight d7, and here h3 by Felipe. The plan next is to play either knight to e2 or knight to f3. Both are good moves. g6. So g6 is sort of the first strange looking move by black, and I think Felipe was kind of thinking here, well, can I punish g6? I see these open squares on the black king side. Maybe I should sink the bishop into h6 soon. So he starts with queen c2, and after knight to h5, forcing the issue of the bishops, he plays bishop to h6. I think that's a good decision. Bishop f8, and now the trade happens on f8. So we're 11 moves in here. This is a 90 plus 30 game, and Felipe already has a very nice advantage. You look at the remaining bishops, white's bishop is opposite color of this pawn chain, so this is a good bishop on d3. Black's bishop is the same color as all of these pawns, so technically that's a bad bishop, and it really doesn't have any great squares. Also, the black king is lacking a little bit of safety. So one thing that someone mentioned in the YouTube comments is I would like more tips on how to evaluate a position and how to create a plan. So these imbalances that I just talked about can go into what we referred to earlier in an earlier video, as the imbalance scorecard. And what you can do here is take weight of all of these different imbalances. So maybe with the minor pieces after knight takes f8, maybe you weight the minor pieces as like a quarter pawn advantage for white, because this bishop is better than this one. And maybe you weight the development as a quarter pawn advantage for white, because white's very quickly getting castled. The knight's coming out to f3, and black's pieces are a little bit misplaced. And you could also say that the king's safety could be another quarter pawn for white, because this king will tuck safely on g1 or even c1, whereas this king is going to have some holes over here on the king's side. Right, so you can start to add up these factors and realize that white probably has a 3/4 of a pawn, maybe larger advantage here. Sometimes there's tactics that can add or subtract to an advantage, but just positionally, I feel like 3/4 of a pawn for white. And then what's a good plan for white? Well, one thing that we could do is quickly get castled, and if black isn't castled yet, maybe a quick e4. Let's see what happens. Knight f3, knight g7, castles, bishop f5. Mistake by black. And here Felipe does an awesome job realizing what's the way to punish this move, bishop f5. And Felipe finds pawn to e4. So this is a critical move. If you don't find pawn to e4 here, like let's just say you play rook to d1. After bishop takes d3, queen takes, and this knight moves, black will get castled safely on the very next move. White has an advantage here, but you're looking at less than a 1 pawn advantage. When Felipe finds pawn to e4, due to the tactics that are about to occur and this king being stuck in the center on e8, white has about a 2 pawn advantage. So these are critical moves that you want to look for in your games. Even if e4 doesn't work here, you do need to at least calculate it, because that's the critical pawn break. Can I play e4, put a rook on e1, and pressure this black king before the king can get to safety? So very nice move by Felipe. So here we see d takes e, bishop takes, knight takes, queen takes check, queen e7. Now here's the next critical moment. We know that we have the advantage here. The black king is stuck on e8 for the time being. He might end up castling queenside, which also looks a bit dangerous. So how do we increase this advantage? In the game, Felipe played rook f to e1. I think this is still a good move, and Stockfish says that white still has like a 2.5 pawn advantage. But after rook f to e1 and the queen trade happens, white has to be very precise to try to make that advantage into a winning position. I would actually prefer, Felipe, to see you play queen to c2 here. And this was a position that he posted in the ChessGoals Discord, and we were kind of discussing it a bit. But I think after queen to c2, now you're threatening to play a move like d5, open up the middle of the board. So even if black queenside castles and d5 gets played, black cannot safely take here. Knight takes d5 wins the queen, and if black doesn't take, like let's say black tries to push past, now you could play a move like knight to b5, you're going after the a pawn, pawn to d6 could be threatened, pawn to b4 is threatened, and very quickly this black king is under a ton of pressure, and white is pretty much winning here already, according to Stockfish. So queen to c2, I think, is the most accurate move. Keep the queens on the board because we know that the king's safety is actually the biggest imbalance. So we want to keep attackers on the board. We don't have the advantage in terms of material, so we can't fall back on that. And you might even argue that this d pawn could become a weakness in the endgame as an isolated pawn. So I think this is a critical moment. Queen to c2, or even a move like queen to d3, I would keep the queens on here. Keep that attacking potential. And then the last move here to keep the kind of a winning advantage for white is actually knight takes e4. And if queenside castle happens, now you could play, for example, knight to e5 and keep the pressure on this way. After rook takes e4, which looks natural, the game is actually kind of close to equal already. So in just 2 moves, the position went from like +4 for white to +2.5 to now less than half a pawn for white. So this is kind of the critical moment of the game, Felipe. You did a really good job up until move 17. 2 small mistakes, but now the rest of the game you played really well. So we'll go through and kind of see how you finished off this endgame. But that's the critical moment for you to focus on, kind of thinking about the king's safety and keeping those queens on the board. So here we see d5. Felipe is playing active, which is good. And now we have kind of this equal endgame, and I'm going to fast forward this a bit more quickly because there's a lot of moves here. But some trades happen, and then we get to this very interesting king and pawn endgame. So here, this is a really interesting endgame. We have 5 pawns each. These pawns are locked up, but Felipe has this one extra pawn on the king side that has a free move. Black does not have any moves with the king side pawns. This is important. White also has opposition here. So there's 3 squares between the kings, and the black king is to move. That's a distant opposition. So here, what black should probably do is preserve the pawn moves and try to bring the king up. Like maybe king to d6. Oh, king to d6 is losing. Okay, this is tricky. So if king to d6, king to d4. And this is going to be losing because black is going to run out of moves. So Stockfish is recommending maybe king to e6. So after king to d4, king to d6 could be played. And the idea is, if white tries to push these pawns, black will always have a way to try to counter the pawns, so that we reach this position where the white king has to back up, and if black steps up, white gets opposition again. But the key here is you never want this position where the defending king, which in this case is black, has to give up ground, because then the offensive king will play for the win, right? Be able to get the pawns first. So I made a blunder here, thinking king d6. King d6 loses for black. King to d7 is playable, because after king to d4, this king can step up. If a move like b5 is played, b6 could be played, because now what happens is this white king can't really enter. There's only 2 entry squares now instead of 3. c5 is defended by this pawn. So black can pretty easily keep the king going back and forth, e6, d6. So these positions require a lot of calculation, and in the game black played b5, and I think this is just a miscalculation. Felipe correctly plays king to d4, threatening to come into 3 squares. King to d6, and now Felipe is able to use this extra pawn move that we talked about earlier. So these spare pawn moves in a king and pawn endgame, extremely important. So he gets this h4 move in. Now this black king has to give up ground. White has opposition again. King to e7 giving up ground. And now the way to win this is to go after the queenside pawns. King c6. Oh, I didn't realize this at first. Okay, very nice move by Felipe again. If king to b6 is played, it's not so clear. King to b6, king to d5, king takes a6, king to e4, takes. Do we push right away? Push. And we get into this race where both sides queen. No advantage here for white. Wow, very nice. Okay, so Felipe plays this subtle move, king back to c5. This is a great move. Now the black king cannot access d5 after it moves. So we see king to e7 by black, now king to b6, and the black king cannot get to d5 in one go. So white is fast enough here to get the win. King d6, takes, king c6 was played, but then Felipe plays king to a5, very simple. This b5 pawn dies next. But if we look at what happens if the race occurs, probably king c5 is more accurate than pushing the a pawn. Now we see the queen would check. I didn't have to go to g3. I could probably play this way. But this is also just going to be too slow for black. And if you wanted, you could even play something like this. Take the pawn. This is still winning. Go get a queen with that pawn. But you really don't even have to do that, because what you can do is you can force this king to get in front of the pawn. Like let's say here, here, check, here, check, here, check. Now at this point, white gets a free move. You can march the king in. So there's no stalemate trick on h1 for black. If you know your queen and 7th pawn endgames, you know that sometimes the black king can go hide. Like it can hide in the corner, for example, like this. But in this case, you can take there because there's still the h-pawn that can move, and you can even ignore that h-pawn and come get the checkmate. So really nice game by Felipe. This opening found the critical move, e4. Very nice strike by white. Here I think there was 2 mistakes in a row, Felipe. Rook f to e1 and rook takes e4 allowed your opponent back into the game. But then this rook and pawn endgame, finding this idea of king to c5 first and then king to b6. I thought you were just waiting, unsure if the race worked, but obviously I was wrong. You calculated it out and found the correct plan. And also this position here, like king e3 was a great move, and you kind of had a good understanding, I think, of when this position was winning and when it was a draw, and this allowed your opponent to make their own mistake. This is a very tricky position to try to calculate out all the pawn moves. So very nice game, Felipe. Felipe is actually the #1 most active ChessGoals member on our Discord server, and if you want to join our Discord server, check out the link in the description below. You can join for $5 a month on Patreon. And for the month of September, we actually have a no-risk promotion. So if you join in September for $5, and you can stick around for the whole month, if you decide that, hey, this ChessGoals community is not for me, just let me know. We'll refund you your $5. So no risk, you can join for 1 month. The ChessGoals Discord server is a really nice community. We have over 150 members, and we're talking always about chess improvement, sharing our wins, sharing our mistakes, doing puzzles. But we also have a lot of fun. We talk about memes, books, opening courses, like anything you can think of, anything chess related. It's a really great community. So check out the links in the description below. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you're not a subscriber. We just hit 500 subs not that long ago. We're trying to reach 1,000 by the end of the year. So let your friends know about the YouTube channel as well. So thanks for watching, everyone. We'll do one last dog view, snoozing. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.